My name is Rachel Morrison, and this is the story of how I lost one family on Thanksgiving and found another, better one in the most unexpected way possible. 5 years ago, I was 26 years old, living in Chicago and working as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm. I'd moved to Chicago from my hometown of Minneapolis 3 years earlier, partly for the job opportunity and partly to get some distance from my family. Not because I didn't love them, but because loving them had become exhausting. I was the middle child in a family of 3 daughters. My older sister Amanda was the golden child, beautiful, charming, married to a successful dentist, mother of 2 perfect children. My younger sister Brittany was the baby, the one who could do no wrong, currently in medical school and engaged to her high school sweetheart. And then there was me. Rachel. The mediocre one. The one who wasn't quite pretty enough, wasn't quite successful enough, wasn't quite anything enough. I'd spent my whole childhood being compared to Amanda, who got straight A's and was homecoming queen. I'd spent my teenage years being compared to Brittany, who was a volleyball star and got a full scholarship to college. I got B's, played JV soccer, and went to a state school on partial financial aid. My parents never said outright that they were disappointed in me, but I felt it in 1,000 small ways. The way they'd talk about Amanda's accomplishments at dinner parties while barely mentioning my new job. The way they'd funded Brittany's medical school but told me they couldn't help with my student loans. The way they always seemed to have time for my sisters but were too busy when I needed them. Still, I kept trying. I called every week. I drove the 6 hours to Minneapolis for holidays and birthdays. I bought thoughtful gifts. I showed interest in their lives. I kept hoping that someday they'd see me, really see me, and realize I was worth their attention too. That Thanksgiving 5 years ago was supposed to be like any other. I'd requested the days off work weeks in advance. I'd bought ingredients to make my grandmother's pumpkin pie recipe, the one contribution to Thanksgiving dinner that was always mine to make. I'd even bought new clothes for the family photos Mom always insisted on taking. Then, 3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother called. "Rachel, honey, we need to talk about Thursday," she said, and something in her voice made my stomach drop. "What about it?" I asked. "Well, Amanda and Brittany think it might be better if you didn't come this year." I was standing in my small Chicago apartment, looking out the window at the gray November sky, and I remember feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. "What do you mean, don't come?" I asked. Mom sighed, like I was being difficult. "Amanda is going through a hard time right now. She and Derek are having some marriage issues, and she just needs a drama-free holiday. You know how you and Amanda can get when you're together." "How we can get?" I repeated. "Mom, I barely even talk to Amanda. How would I cause drama?" "You know what I mean, Rachel. You get sensitive about things, and Amanda has enough stress right now without worrying about your feelings. Brittany agrees that it's better if you sit this one out." I felt like I'd been slapped. So Brittany and Amanda decided together that I'm not welcome at Thanksgiving? Don't make it sound like that. It's just one holiday. You can come for Christmas. Did you tell them no? I asked. Did you tell them that I'm your daughter too and I'm coming to Thanksgiving like always? There was a long pause. In that pause, I heard everything I needed to know. "Rachel, don't be dramatic. It's just easier this way. You understand, don't you?" I didn't understand. I didn't understand how my own mother could uninvite me from Thanksgiving because my sisters found my existence inconvenient. I didn't understand how being the family scapegoat had become so normalized that they didn't even see how cruel this was. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I won't come." "Thank you, honey. I knew you'd understand. We'll see you at Christmas, okay?" I hung up without saying goodbye. I spent the next 2 days crying, then being angry, then cycling back to crying again. My roommate Sarah tried to comfort me, but she was going home to her own family in Wisconsin. By Wednesday evening, I was alone in the apartment, staring at the pumpkin pie ingredients on my counter and feeling more lonely than I'd ever felt in my life. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and gray. I woke up late, scrolled through social media and saw photos of my friends with their families, all looking happy and loved. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I say? I thought about ordering Chinese food and spending the day in my pajamas watching movies, but that felt too pathetic even for me. So I did something I'd never done before. I got dressed, did my makeup, and went to a restaurant alone. I'd read about Morton's Steakhouse doing a special Thanksgiving dinner, and I figured if I was going to be alone on a major holiday, I might as well do it somewhere nice. I made a reservation for one, ignored the pitying look the hostess gave me, and sat down at a small table in the corner with a book I'd brought to make myself look less pathetic. The restaurant was about half full, mostly families and couples. I tried not to watch them, tried not to feel sorry for myself, but it was hard. Everyone else had people who wanted them there. Everyone else belonged somewhere. I ordered the turkey dinner and a glass of wine. I opened my book but couldn't focus on the words. I was fighting back tears when I heard a voice beside me. "Excuse me, are you here alone?" I looked up to see a woman in her 50s standing beside my table. She had warm brown eyes and smile lines around her mouth. She was gesturing to the large table behind her, where I could see a group of about 10 people of various ages. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just me. Would you like to join us?" she asked. "We have plenty of room, and no one should be alone on Thanksgiving." I opened my mouth to politely decline, to say I was fine, that I preferred being alone with my book. But what came out instead was, "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," she said firmly. "I'm Margaret Chen, and that chaos over there is my family. Come on, bring your wine." Before I quite knew what was happening, I was being ushered over to the large table. Margaret introduced me to everyone. Her husband Robert, a quiet man with kind eyes, her 3 adult children, David, Lisa, and James, their spouses, and 4 grandchildren ranging in age from 5 to 12. "Everyone, this is..." Margaret paused, realizing she didn't know my name. "Rachel," I supplied. "Rachel Morrison." "Rachel is joining us for Thanksgiving," Margaret announced, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Make room, David." David, who looked to be in his early 30s, immediately shifted his chair to make space for me between him and his wife Sophie. The kids stared at me with frank curiosity, but the adults just smiled and welcomed me like I belonged there. "So Rachel, what brings you to Morton's on Thanksgiving?" Robert asked, not unkindly. I could have lied. I could have said my family lived far away or that I had to work or any number of things that would have saved face. But something about these strangers made me want to tell the truth. "My family uninvited me from Thanksgiving," I said. "My sisters thought I'd cause drama, so my parents told me not to come." There was a moment of shocked silence. Then Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then your family is missing out," she said firmly. "We're very glad you're here." And just like that, I was part of their Thanksgiving. The Chen family, I learned over the course of that dinner, had their own story. They'd immigrated from Taiwan when Margaret and Robert were newly married. They'd built a life in Chicago through hard work and determination. Robert had worked as an engineer while Margaret raised their 3 children and worked part-time as a seamstress. Now Robert was retired, the kids were all successful in their own ways, and the family gathered every Thanksgiving at Morton's because it had been the first fancy restaurant Robert had taken Margaret to when they could finally afford it. "It's our tradition," Lisa explained. She was the middle child, like me, a high school math teacher with a warm laugh. "Some families do turkey at home. We do turkey here and remember where we came from." They asked about my life, and I found myself telling them things I rarely shared, about my job, about my design work, about the mural I was painting in my apartment. They actually listened. They asked follow-up questions. They seemed genuinely interested. The kids, once they got over their initial shyness, decided I was fascinating. The youngest, a 5-year-old named Emma, climbed into my lap during dessert and declared I had princess hair. Her older brother Michael showed me his new video game on his tablet. I felt more welcomed by these strangers in 3 hours than I'd felt by my own family in years. When dinner was winding down, Margaret invited me to their house for coffee and pie. "I made pumpkin pie from my mother's recipe," she said. "You have to try it." I almost declined. I'd already intruded enough on their family time. But something made me say yes. Their house was in a quiet neighborhood on the north side, a modest 2-story with a well-kept garden. The inside was warm and lived in, full of family photos and comfortable furniture and the smell of cinnamon. We sat in the living room, eating pie and drinking coffee, while the kids played in the basement and the adults talked. I told them more about my family, about always feeling like I didn't measure up, about being the daughter who was never quite good enough. And they told me about their own struggles, about the racism they'd faced, about the difficulty of bridging 2 cultures, about their own family conflicts and reconciliations. "Family is complicated," Robert said thoughtfully. "Blood doesn't always mean love, and love doesn't always require blood." When it was time to leave, Margaret hugged me tight. "You call me if you need anything," she said. "And I mean anything. I'm serious." She pressed a piece of paper into my hand with her phone number on it. "Promise me you'll use this." I promised, thinking I probably wouldn't. Why would I bother these kind strangers who'd already done more than enough? But 3 weeks later, when my car broke down on a Sunday and I didn't know who to call, I found myself dialing Margaret's number. She and Robert came to get me, helped me get my car to a mechanic, refused to let me pay them back for the tow truck. "That's what family does," Margaret said. I started getting invited to things. Sunday dinners at the Chen house. Game nights. Birthday parties for the grandkids. At first I felt awkward, like I was imposing, but they kept inviting me and I kept saying yes because being with them felt like coming home. I did go to my parents' house for Christmas that year. It was exactly as awkward as I'd expected. Amanda barely spoke to me. Brittany was absorbed in wedding planning. My parents seemed relieved when I left a day early, claiming I had to work. I drove back to Chicago and went straight to the Chen house, where Margaret took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I cried on her shoulder while she patted my back and told me I deserved better. Over the next year, the Chens became more and more central to my life. Margaret taught me to cook traditional Taiwanese dishes. Robert helped me fix things in my apartment. Lisa and I started getting coffee every other week. David helped me build a website for my freelance design work. Sophie became one of my best friends. The kids called me Auntie Rachel. I spent more holidays with the Chens than with my own family. My parents noticed, occasionally, and would make comments about me abandoning them for my new family, but they never seemed to consider that they'd pushed me away first. Amanda and Brittany didn't notice at all. They were too wrapped up in their own lives to care where I was or who I was with. About 2 years after that first Thanksgiving, I was having dinner at the Chen house when Margaret said something that changed everything. "You know, Rachel, you're as much my daughter as Lisa is. I hope you know that." I'd started crying, and Margaret had cried too, and then we were both laughing and crying and hugging. That night, Robert pulled me aside. "We've been thinking," he said carefully. "How would you feel about making this official? Adult adoption is a thing. We'd like to formally adopt you, if you're willing." I was 28 years old, far too old for adoption in the traditional sense. But adult adoption was legal in Illinois, a way to formalize family bonds that existed in every way but legally. "Are you sure?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "We've never been more sure of anything," he said. 6 months later, I stood in a courthouse with the Chens and legally became Rachel Chen. I changed my last name, signed the papers, made it official. The Chens were my family now, not just in my heart but in the eyes of the law. My biological family didn't know. I didn't tell them. What would I say? Hey mom and dad, I got adopted by another family because they actually wanted me? It felt both too cruel and too honest. I kept in minimal contact with my birth family. Phone calls on birthdays. Brief visits once or twice a year. They seemed content with this arrangement, relieved even. Amanda and Brittany continued their lives without noticing I'd largely left mine. My parents seemed to think I was just going through a phase with my distance. 3 years after my adoption, I met Daniel at a design conference. He was an architect, kind and funny and completely accepting of my complicated family situation. When I introduced him to the Chens, they loved him immediately. When he proposed a year later, it was Robert he asked for permission, and Margaret who cried happy tears. We planned the wedding for the following summer. It would be at a botanical garden in Chicago, small and intimate, about 75 guests. I agonized over whether to invite my biological family. You should invite them, Margaret said. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to have no regrets. So I sent invitations to my parents, Amanda, and Brittany. I included a note saying I hoped they could come. I didn't mention that I'd been adopted. I didn't mention that the wedding program would list Margaret and Robert Chen as my parents. I told myself I'd explain when they arrived. My mother called when she got the invitation. Of course we'll be there, she said. I can't believe you're getting married. Why didn't you tell us you were even dating someone? Because you never asked, I thought. Out loud I said, it happened pretty fast. I'm really happy. Well, your father and I are so excited. Amanda and Brittany too. This will be wonderful. I wondered if it would be wonderful, or if it would be a disaster. But I'd sent the invitations. There was no taking them back now. The day of the wedding arrived perfect and sunny. The botanical garden was in full bloom, flowers everywhere, exactly as I'd dreamed. I got ready in the bridal suite with Sophie and Lisa, my bridesmaids, while Margaret helped me into my dress. You look beautiful, she said, tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, Mom, I said, and I meant it. She was my mom in every way that mattered. I could see my biological family as I was preparing to walk down the aisle. They'd arrived and were seated in the middle section, looking around with interest. My mother waved at me. I waved back, my stomach churning with anxiety about what was about to happen. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. Daniel and I had written our own vows. When it came time for the parents to give their blessing, the officiant called on the parents of the bride, Robert and Margaret Chen. I watched my mother's face as Robert and Margaret stood up from the front row. I watched confusion cross her features, then shock, then something like understanding. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, my biological family found me. My mother's face was red, her eyes bright with unshed tears, though I couldn't tell if they were from hurt or anger. Rachel, what was that? She demanded, her voice low. Why were those people introduced as your parents? Because they are my parents, I said calmly. Legally. I was adopted by the Chen family 3 years ago. Amanda's mouth fell open. You were adopted? At 28? That's not even possible. Adult adoption is definitely possible, I said. And it was the best decision I've ever made. My father, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Why would you do something like that? I looked at him, at all of them, and felt surprisingly calm. Do you remember 5 years ago, when you uninvited me from Thanksgiving because Amanda didn't want drama? My mother flinched. Rachel, that was years ago. I went to a restaurant alone that day, I continued. And the Chen family invited me to join them. They invited a complete stranger to share their Thanksgiving because they didn't think anyone should be alone on a holiday. And then they kept inviting me to things. They showed interest in my life. They supported my dreams. They treated me like I mattered. They became my family because they chose to be, not because they had to be. We're your family, Brittany said, her voice small. We're your real family. Are you? I asked, not unkindly. When's the last time any of you called me just to talk? When's the last time you visited me in Chicago? When's the last time you asked about my life, my work, my happiness? The Chens do all of that. They show up for me. They love me. They chose me. That's what makes them my real family. My mother was crying now. We love you too, Rachel. You know that. Maybe you do, I said. But you've never shown it in a way that made me feel it. I spent my whole childhood feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I was the daughter you were stuck with while Amanda and Brittany were the daughters you wanted. And when I finally found people who made me feel wanted and valued and loved, I grabbed onto that with both hands. So you're replacing us? Amanda asked. Just like that? I'm not replacing you. I'm choosing to prioritize the people who prioritize me. The Chens didn't have to love me, but they did anyway. You were supposed to love me, but you made me feel like an obligation. Daniel appeared at my elbow, probably sensing I needed support. He put his arm around my waist. Everything okay here? Yes, I said, leaning into him. I was just explaining to my biological family about my real family. My father's face was hard. If that's how you feel, maybe we should just leave. Part of me wanted to stop him, to apologize, to smooth things over like I'd always done. But I was done making myself small for their comfort. If that's what you want to do, I understand, I said. But you're welcome to stay. The Chens would probably like to meet you. They stayed, though I could tell it was uncomfortable for them. I watched my mother watch Margaret, saw her seeing how Margaret straightened my veil, how she laughed at my jokes, how she looked at me with unmistakable pride and love. During the reception, Margaret gave a mother of the bride speech that had everyone in tears. 5 years ago, my family met Rachel on Thanksgiving, and we invited her to join us for dinner, she said. We thought we were doing a kindness for a young woman who was alone on a holiday. What we didn't know was that Rachel was the missing piece of our family. She brought joy and light and love into our lives. She became a sister to my children, an aunt to my grandchildren, and a daughter to Robert and me. Today, I'm not losing a daughter, I already have her. Today, I'm gaining a son in Daniel, who is worthy of our Rachel. We are so blessed. I saw my mother crying in her seat. Amanda and Brittany were both looking at their phones, barely paying attention. My father's expression was unreadable. Later in the evening, my mother found me again. We stood on the edge of the dance floor, watching Daniel dance with his niece. I didn't realize, she said quietly. I didn't realize how much we'd hurt you. I know, I said. That's part of the problem. You didn't even notice. Can we fix this? She asked. Can we start over? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto any scrap of love from her. But I'd grown a lot in 5 years. I'd learned what real, unconditional love looked like. I'd learned I didn't have to settle for crumbs. I don't know, I said honestly. That would require you to actually change how you treat me. To see me as someone valuable, not just as the daughter who doesn't measure up to her sisters. To prioritize me sometimes, not just when it's convenient. I don't know if you can do that. I want to try, she said. Then try, I said. But understand that the Chens are my parents now. They're the ones who walk me down the aisle in my life. You can be part of my life if you want, but you're not the center of it anymore. That ship has sailed. My mother nodded slowly. I could see her processing this, struggling with it. She'd lost something she'd taken for granted, and she was only now realizing it was gone. The wedding ended beautifully. Daniel and I left for our honeymoon in Italy, and when we came back 2 weeks later, there were flowers waiting at our apartment. Some were from Daniel's family. Some were from the Chens. And some, surprisingly, were from my mother, with a card that said, "I'm sorry. I want to do better. Please give me a chance." That was 5 months ago. My mother has been trying, I'll give her that. She calls me now, actually calls to talk, not just to relay information about family events. She asks about my work. She's visited Chicago twice to spend time with me, just me, not as part of some bigger family obligation. It's strange and awkward and sometimes painful, but it's something. Amanda and Brittany haven't changed. They're still wrapped up in their own lives, still don't really see me as someone worth their time. I've made peace with that. Not every relationship can be saved, and not every family bond is worth maintaining. My father is trying too, in his own way. He's not good with emotions or apologies, but he's shown up. He came to Chicago last month and took Daniel and me out to dinner. He asked about my business and actually listened to the answers. It's not a close relationship, but it's more honest than it's ever been. But the Chens are still my real family. I have Sunday dinners at their house. The kids still call me Auntie Rachel. Margaret and I get coffee every week. Robert helped Daniel and me buy our first house. When I found out I was pregnant 2 months ago, the Chens were the first people we told. Margaret cried and said, "I'm going to be a grandmother again." And she is. She's this baby's grandmother in every way that matters. I think about that Thanksgiving 5 years ago sometimes. I think about sitting alone in a restaurant, feeling sorry for myself, believing I was unlovable because my own family didn't seem to love me. I think about Margaret Chen walking up to my table and asking if I wanted to join them. Such a small gesture. Such an enormous impact. I'd been so focused on earning love from people who were never going to give it to me that I'd almost missed the love being offered freely by strangers. The Chen saw something in me that my biological family never did. They saw someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth keeping. And they didn't just invite me to one Thanksgiving dinner. They invited me into their lives, permanently, irrevocably. They chose me. That choice changed everything. My parents found out at my wedding that they'd lost me, but really, they'd lost me years before. They'd lost me every time they chose my sisters over me, every time they made me feel small, every time they treated my presence as an obligation rather than a gift. They lost me, and the Chens found me. People ask me sometimes if I regret the way things happened, if I wish I'd tried harder to fix things with my biological family before seeking love elsewhere. The answer is no. I don't regret finding people who love me well. I don't regret choosing myself and my happiness. I don't regret the Chens. My name is Rachel Chen. I'm 29 years old, married to a wonderful man, pregnant with my first child, running a successful design business, and surrounded by a family who loves me unconditionally. I have 3 siblings now: David, Lisa, and James. I have 2 parents who are proud of me: Margaret and Robert. I have nieces and nephews who adore me. I have a place at the table that doesn't feel like charity. And it all started because I showed up alone at a restaurant on Thanksgiving, and a kind woman asked me if I wanted to join her family. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to find your people, your tribe, the ones who see you and choose you and love you. I found mine at a table in Morton's Steakhouse on a cold November day. And that finding, that choosing, that loving, it saved me. My biological parents told me not to come home for Thanksgiving because my sister didn't want drama. So I went to a restaurant alone, and the family at the next table invited me to join them. 5 years later, they're my legal family. My parents found out at my wedding. And I've never been happier.